The earth cracked open on the 7th minute of silence, not from tremor, but from breath. Daniel Hayes had only come to Ironhill to bury a man he hated, his father. The town was small, cold, and too quiet. And yet, beneath the moss-covered gravestones, something old had waited for him. As the final clump of dirt hit the coffin, the birds stopped singing. And then came the scent, burnt ash and lavender, as if the world had exhaled through ancient lungs. The ground beneath his boots turned black, his vision blurred, and the name carved on the gravestone changed. Not his father's, his. When he tried to run, the world collapsed inward, not in light, but in silence. He awoke in a forest of dead trees, their bark bleeding silver. And the voice, that damn voice, whispering through the ash, "You carry fire, but not the kind that warms." He staggered forward, boots sinking slightly into the ashen soil. Every step released a whisper, not from beneath, but from within. The forest was a wound, and he walked along its scar. Shapes loomed between trees, not animals, not people, just outlines made of smoke and memory. One turned its head as he passed, and its face was his own. Daniel didn't look back. The mark on his chest pulsed gently under his shirt, warm like coals buried in dirt. The warmth wasn't comforting. It was alive, watching him. He walked until the trees bent out of the way and revealed something impossible. A house. His house. Or the house his memory insisted upon. Crooked porch, faded paint, a crack in the third step he once tripped on. But it was wrong. The proportions were too long, the angles slightly warped, as though someone had drawn it from memory and gotten the details just off. The front door opened before he could touch it. Inside, the lights flickered with no source. Photographs lined the hallway walls, all familiar at first glance, but wrong when studied. Each frame held his family, smiling in moments they never had. A birthday he didn't remember celebrating. A Christmas with no snow, though it had always snowed. Their eyes were all scratched out, not violently, but deliberately. He walked past them. The hallway narrowed as he moved, pressing closer, as if the house wanted to hold him still. At the far end, the door to the garage glowed with a deep orange light. That door had always been closed. His father's space, untouchable, sacred in the worst way. He reached for the handle. It wasn't cold. It was warm, pulsing like a vein. He opened it. The garage was not a garage. It was a memory forged from smoke and weight. Tools lined the walls, hung in perfect alignment, but none of them had shadows. The air was thick with the smell of oil, and something sweeter beneath. Lavender again, but rotting. In the corner stood a figure, broad-shouldered, greasy hands, boots scuffed from decades of concrete. The man's head was turned, always slightly away, always just out of focus. Daniel stepped forward, but the air pushed back, like gravity, but colder. And the man spoke, not in his father's voice, in Daniel's. "You came back to bury me, and still you brought me here." Daniel froze. The glyph beneath his skin throbbed once, hard enough to make his vision darken. "What do you want from me?" The figure turned. It had no face, just ash, shifting constantly, like smoke trapped behind a mask. Not want, need. The photograph on the workbench ignited. No spark, no flame. It simply began to burn from within. Daniel watched it curl, and for a moment, he saw her. The woman who had walked away without turning back. The one who told him softly that he was too much like his father. The garage dissolved. Now he was in the basement. But not his. Not really. A hybrid of memory and dream. Damp walls. A workbench. And in the corner, a boy. Himself. 10, maybe. Curled in on himself. Hands over his ears as muffled shouting bled through the ceiling. The boy didn't look up. Daniel stepped closer. The boy flickered. His arms were covered in soot. His eyes were gone. "You didn't stop it," the voice said. "You learned to carry it." He stumbled back. The basement cracked. Not physically, emotionally. The kind of crack you don't see, but feel. Like something inside had just split. The glyph on his chest erupted with heat. Molten orange light bled through his shirt. Daniel cried out, but the sound didn't escape his lips. And then flames from his back, from his hands. Not fire like he'd ever known, but fire made of scenes, of moments, of grief. They curled into wings, vast and silent, each flicker holding something he had buried. His mother crying at the kitchen table, his brother lying about the bruises, himself alone in that house long after the yelling stopped. The fire didn't burn the ash. It lit it. The world bent. The faceless figure stepped through the smoke, now made of pure white-hot silence. Daniel faced him. The creature raised a hand, palm open. "You burn, not to destroy, to illuminate." Daniel reached out. Their hands didn't touch. They merged. For a breathless instant, the world went still. Then the fire flowed inward, into him, and the glyph split into two rings, orbiting each other across his chest like moons made of pain. He raised his hand, the air bent, and the ash obeyed. The ash swirled like 1,000 memories untethered, coiling around his limbs but never touching, responding to his thoughts before he could even form them. Daniel moved his hand in a slow arc, and the trees ahead bowed, not breaking but bending in acknowledgement. The glyphs on his chest rotated, gaining speed, emitting a hum so low it settled in his bones. He felt no heat now, only control, and beneath that, a pressure building like thunder behind clouds. The forest opened without warning, revealing a field that glowed with pale moss and flickers of blue fire dancing inches above the soil. In the center stood a stone archway, cracked and humming with the same rhythm as his mark. Something inside him whispered that this was a gate, not out of the world, but deeper into it. As he stepped forward, the wind changed. It no longer whispered memories. It sang them. He heard his mother's lullaby, warped into minor chords. He heard the slamming of doors, his father's voice rising like smoke. He heard himself younger, shouting things he never meant to say. Each sound coiled around his ribs until his breath came sharp and shallow. The arch pulsed brighter. A shape waited just beyond it. A figure cloaked in deep maroon, tall and unmoving, its face obscured by strands of gold thread that fell like a veil. Daniel hesitated. The fire in him urged forward, but his legs trembled. He took one step. The figure raised a hand, not in greeting, in warning. A gust of ash erupted between them, and from it emerged something ancient, not alive, but aware. A beast made of bone and charcoal, its eyes twin embers, its breath rattling like broken glass in a furnace. The fire inside Daniel flared, and instinct took hold. He reached outward, not with muscle, but with memory. The ash around him sharpened, forming blades without edges, pure intent sculpted from grief. The beast charged. Daniel didn't run. He stood still and brought both hands forward. The blades of ash struck the creature, not slicing but unraveling, each strike releasing a whisper from its body, a name, a face, a buried scream. When the last strand of the beast dissolved into smoke, Daniel stood alone again, chest heaving. The figure beyond the arch stepped forward, its veil lifting just enough to reveal a mouth that didn't move, but still spoke, not aloud. Inside him, "You have faced the first gate. The fire you carry is yours to shape. But beware, it burns the bearer before it burns the world." The figure vanished. The archway split down the middle. Daniel stepped through. The world beyond was darker. The sky above shimmered with veins of crimson lightning, though there were no clouds. A tower loomed in the distance, impossibly tall, its surface moving like liquid stone. Around it, shadows walked upright, neither friend nor foe, merely watching. Daniel's glyph pulsed with unease. His fire dimmed, as if unsure. The ash here didn't rise at his command. It resisted. For the first time since arriving, he felt small, human. He reached for the mark on his chest, willing it to glow brighter, but it only flickered. Something was draining him. A voice, not the same one, echoed from within the tower. Different, sharper. Daniel Hayes, son of silence. The past does not sleep here. It feeds. He looked around, searching for the source, but saw only reflections in the ash. His reflection fragmented. In each, he was different. In one, a child sobbing. In another, a man with blood on his hands. In another, just eyes, hollow, burned out. He clenched his fists, and the fire reignited, this time from his spine, flowing up and over his shoulders like molten chains. He walked toward the tower. The ground became brittle beneath his steps, as if rejecting his weight. He passed a shattered statue of a man kneeling, face turned upward in agony, hands reaching for something unseen. At its base, a plaque read, "Those who refuse to feel." A second statue, a woman turned to salt, eyes closed in denial. Those who chose to forget. As Daniel approached the tower's base, a door appeared, made not of wood or metal, but of woven memory. Threads of sound, color, regret. He reached for it. The moment his fingers touched the weave, his mind cracked open. Not gently, violently. Visions poured in. His father in a hospital bed, breath shallow, eyes begging without apology. Daniel standing at the foot of the bed, unmoved. The funeral. The eulogy he never gave. The truth he never spoke. The hate he never buried. The door unspooled and let him through. Inside was not a room. It was a storm. Fire and ash collided in spirals. Figures moved in the chaos, not people, but echoes of him. Every version he could have been. The one who forgave. The one who became his father. The one who never left. The one who didn't survive. In the center of the storm hovered a sphere of black glass. Within it, a face. His father's. Not breathing, not speaking, just watching. Daniel stepped into the storm, and the fire in his chest grew wild. He screamed, not in pain, but in refusal. He wouldn't let the past define him, but neither would he run from it. He thrust his hand into the sphere. The glass cracked. The fire surged, and the world went white. When color returned, he stood outside the tower, alone. The glyph on his chest now burned steadily, no longer molten, but alive. The ash bent again to his will. A path opened, not forward, but in every direction. Daniel looked up. The forest was gone. The storm was gone. But the voice remained, soft as breath. You carry fire. Let it light the dark. He walked into the unknown, not to escape, but to illuminate. He walked until the sky changed, until the crimson veins above faded into a deep violet haze, speckled with silver motes that drifted like embers in reverse. The land around him pulsed, as though breathing with him, not hostile, not welcoming, just aware. Time felt unhooked. His memories swirled at the edge of his thoughts. Not quite his anymore, but not gone. The ash underfoot grew thin, revealing black stone marked with faint circular symbols that lit up only when he stepped near. Each glow hummed a note of something buried. A memory, a regret, a choice. And then he heard it. A rhythm, not sound, but sensation. A drumbeat inside his bones. A heart that wasn't his. The mark on his chest synchronized with it, faster now, demanding. The ground sloped downward, leading him to a hollow lit by no sun. In the center, a pool of still black liquid reflected only fire. Not the fire around him, the fire within. Shapes moved beneath the surface, familiar, painful. His mother walking away from an argument in tears. A younger version of himself slamming a door. The first time he raised his voice and saw someone flinch. The pool whispered to him, but not in words, in understanding. It wanted him to look deeper. He knelt beside it, unsure. The ash curled behind him like a nervous animal. Then a breath, not his, stirred the pool, and from it emerged a figure cloaked in shadow, yet dripping flame from its fingertips. It had no face, but Daniel knew it. Knew it the way one knows a scream held in too long. The figure raised a hand, and in it formed a mirror, not glass, but liquid flame. When Daniel looked, he saw not himself, but his father, younger, smiling, before the drinking, before the silence, before the anger. The figure held the mirror out to him, as if asking, was this what you lost, or what you abandoned? Daniel reached for it. The mirror seared his hand, branding a second glyph along his wrist, different from the one on his chest, smaller, angular, sharp like a wound that never healed right. The moment the mark formed, the figure vanished. So did the pool. Daniel stood alone again, but not unchanged. The new glyph pulsed with shame, the old one with resolve. Together they beat a new rhythm, not just pain, but purpose. He turned. A staircase now spiraled down from the hollow's edge, each step carved from obsidian, etched with phrases he could barely read, fragments of confessions, pleas, secrets, some in his own voice. He descended slowly. The air grew thicker with each step, until it felt like moving through memory made solid. At the base, a chamber opened, vast and empty, except for a single stone dais in the center. Upon it sat a book, bound in black hide, its pages open to a blank spread. No words, just potential. A voice echoed again, not from above, not from within. All you were, all you could become, write it. Daniel hesitated. His hands shook. The fire inside him wavered. He had burned so much. Could he create? He stepped forward. As his fingers touched the page, the fire didn't lash out. It flowed, not in destruction, but in ink. Words formed beneath his hand, not from thought, but from honesty. A sentence, then another, a memory he had buried beneath layers of hate. The way his father tucked him in as a boy, before the shouting ever started. A whispered promise he'd forgotten. I'm trying, son. I just don't know how. Daniel's hands trembled. Tears rose, but didn't fall. The glyphs glowed in unison, no longer red or orange, but gold. The chamber lit from within. The book closed on its own. When Daniel looked up, the walls had vanished. He stood atop a cliff, overlooking a horizon that shimmered like heat over asphalt. And there, far in the distance, was a gate, vast, ancient, and waiting. But something else stirred nearby. A presence. Not hostile, not guiding. The figure again, the first one, faceless, with a mask cracked down the center. Watching. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. Daniel nodded once, and the figure slowly turned, dissolving into smoke that drifted toward the horizon. The path forward was his to choose. Not forced, not fated, chosen. He began to walk, fire still lit, but no longer raging. It burned with purpose now, quiet, strong, and behind him, the world of ash folded in on itself, closing gently like the cover of a story not ended, just turning the page. As Daniel walked, the landscape shifted from black stone to a field of tall, pale grass that shimmered like moonlight, even without a moon. The wind carried no scent, but it stirred memories, ones he hadn't touched in years. Laughter in the backseat of a car. The weight of a hand on his shoulder the day he graduated. Silence at the dinner table the night he didn't return a call. Each blade of grass seemed to sing softly as he passed, echoing these pieces of him that still clung, neither forgiven nor forgotten. The path narrowed, curling around a ridge where obsidian statues stood half buried in the earth. Not grand warriors or kings, but ordinary people, each frozen mid-emotion. A woman covering her face in grief. A man on his knees, arms raised in plea. A child clutching something unseen to their chest. Daniel didn't stop. His fire didn't rage now, but it glowed steadily beneath his skin, warming the air around him. He came to a bridge made of bone-white branches braided together by unseen hands, suspended over a chasm of ink. Below, shapes writhed, not alive, not dead, regrets given form. They whispered, begging him to look down, to remember them, to carry them again. He didn't. At the center of the bridge, the wind stopped. Time stilled, and from the shadows ahead emerged a man. No mask, no mist, no flames, just a man. Familiar. Daniel's own face, but older. Harder, the lines deeper, the eyes colder. He wore no emotion. He held no weapon. But the fire around Daniel flinched. The older Daniel spoke in a voice that held no echo. You survived, but you never changed. The younger Daniel, the one still walking, stared back in silence. The older one continued. You carry fire, but you burn the same paths, over and over. Pain into rage, rage into ash. What have you illuminated? What have you warmed? Daniel stepped forward. The bridge creaked. I've seen the truth. I faced the storm. I burned it. The older version didn't move. Did you? Or did you only burn yourself again? He raised a hand, and the fire around him flared. Not golden, but gray. Ash fire. It hissed with exhaustion. Daniel raised his own, and the air around him bent slightly, not in defiance, but in clarity. I don't need to fight you. The older Daniel's fire flickered. Then why are you here? Daniel stepped closer, and the glyphs on his chest and wrist aligned, glowing brighter. To let go. Not to forget. To forgive myself and him. The older version stared at him, then slowly cracked like a mirror under heat. Shards of himself fell into the void below, each one whispering a word. Guilt, fear, pride, silence. When the final piece vanished, the bridge straightened. The fire around Daniel brightened, silent and calm. He walked on. The grass returned, the sky warmed. Ahead, the gate loomed closer, no longer distant, no longer watching. It stood like a heartbeat, ready to open. But before he reached it, the faceless figure appeared again, not in front of him, but beside him. For the first time, Daniel didn't flinch. The figure turned slightly, enough for the cracked mask to catch the light. Daniel asked nothing. The presence was enough. Together they stood at the edge. The gate shimmered with the same color as the fire inside him, a golden flame born from memory and release. He stepped through. The light did not blind him. It embraced. And somewhere far behind him, in a graveyard no longer still, the name on the gravestone changed once more. Not his father's. Not his. Just a name. Burned away. Set free. Daniel emerged not into light, but into a quiet unlike any he had ever known. A silence so deep it wasn't empty, but full. The kind of quiet that exists just before understanding. He stood on a plane of glass-like stone, where his reflection did not mimic his movements, but walked beside him, glancing sideways as if now equal. In the distance, mountains hung upside down from a violet sky, their peaks anchored to nothing, tripping glowing rivers into the air. He walked without knowing why, only that something waited ahead. Not danger, not salvation, closure. The glyphs on his body no longer pulsed, they breathed. Their glow sensed to his steps, no longer driven by pain or fury, but balance. Around him, the air shimmered faintly, bending in waves as if reality were uncertain here. At the center of the plain stood a small platform, barely raised, etched with runes that mirrored the ones on his skin. Upon it, a single object hovered, a shard of obsidian, spinning slowly in place, surrounded by a faint golden halo. He stepped closer. The voice returned, not whispering this time, but clear and low, like a thought too deep to speak aloud. You have carried fire, Daniel Hayes. You have let it burn, and you have let it guide. Now, what will you leave behind? The shard glowed brighter. Images rippled across its surface. Moments from Ironhill, from childhood, from the silence between him and his father. All the words they never said. All the rage that filled the space where love had once tried to grow. He reached toward the shard. The air around it resisted like thick water, testing him. The glyphs on his skin flared once, then dimmed. The ash fire coiled softly from his fingertips. When he touched the shard, it didn't burn. It dissolved, flowing up his arm like warm ink, spiraling toward his chest and merging into the center of his being. For a moment, Daniel saw everything, not as it happened, but as it could have. 1,000 paths, some darker, some gentler, none perfect. He saw a version of himself who stayed. A version who left and never looked back. A version who forgave too soon. A version who never forgave at all. Then it was gone. He stood alone again, but whole. The sky above cracked open with a soundless ripple, revealing a vast spiral of light and shadow that stretched beyond sight. From it, strands of gold and black descended like threads of a loom, weaving something vast, unseen. The gate he had passed through no longer loomed behind him. There was no going back, but there was no need. A path unfurled before him, not made of stone, but of light. Each step forward erased itself behind him. He wasn't returning to the world he came from. He was becoming something that could walk between. A witness, a firebringer, not to destroy, to illuminate. And far behind him, where ash had once ruled and silence had weighed heavy, something shifted. A single blade of grass grew in the dead forest. Silver, sharp, alive. The fire had passed through. And what it left behind was not ruin. It was space. For something new. He walked the path of light until it faded into mist, until the sky turned to charcoal and the ground grew soft beneath his feet. The fire within him no longer flared or whispered. It simply was, like breath, like pulse. The forest ahead was different. Not the dead silver trees from before, but tall pines with bark of onyx and leaves that shimmered with faint memory. He paused, not from fear, but instinct. In the clearing stood a small structure. Not a house, not a temple, but something between. Built of wood that had not been cut but offered itself, glowing faintly with warmth. A figure stood at its entrance. Not the masked one. This one had a face. Familiar. Worn. The man from the photograph. His father, or what remained of him here. His eyes were not cruel, not broken, just tired. He said nothing, but stepped aside. Daniel entered. The room was simple. A table, 2 chairs, a set of tools laid neatly on the bench. And at the center, a project left unfinished. A small sculpture of a bird, wings half-formed. Daniel sat. Across from him, the man, no longer a monster, no longer a memory, sat too. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Daniel picked up the carving knife. The flame didn't fight him. It steadied his hand. He shaped the wood with care, with memory, with everything he had never been able to say. Outside, the sky turned amber. Somewhere far off, the mask watched. And when the bird was done, Daniel set it between them. The old man smiled and faded. The fire dimmed in Daniel's chest, not because it was gone, because it had landed. Grounded, balanced, he stepped outside. The house was gone. The trees bowed gently. And in the sky above, the spiral of Duat glimmered like a constellation no one would ever name. Daniel stood at the threshold of something new. Not escape, not return, integration. And as the wind carried the scent of ash and lavender one final time, the voice returned, not in warning, in acknowledgement. You carried fire. And this time, you didn't burn. You became. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long, long while, he felt quiet inside. Not the silence of absence, but of presence. Like the space after a storm, when the world still holds its breath, unsure if it survived, and then realizes it did. The air around him shimmered, and the ground beneath his feet shifted subtly, not pulling him back, not pushing him forward, simply changing because he had changed. Behind his closed eyes, he saw flickers of fire, not destructive, but illuminating, mapping the shape of his soul in glowing veins. The glyphs no longer pulsed, they rested, and when he opened his eyes, Duat was no longer foreign. It was part of him. He took a breath and turned toward the nothing that became a doorway. Not back to Ironhill, not yet, but forward into the rest of Duat, where paths crossed, where others wandered, where more fire waited to be found or lost. And somewhere, across that vast and shifting land, the mask would wait again, not as judge, not as jailer, but as witness. Because this world was not punishment, it was a reflection. And Daniel, who came to bury a man he hated, walked now not with hate, but with memory. He walked not as a man burning with anger, but as one who carried fire and knew what it meant to hold it.